The Strait of Hormuz has been blocked, disrupted, and functionally closed to commercial shipping for 26 days. The world knows that. The world has been watching that. The world has been modeling the economic consequences of that specific choke point being contested. What the world was not modeling, what every energy security analyst I have spoken to this week describes as the scenario they hoped would not happen, is this morning's development. Iran struck Yanbu, the Saudi Arabian port on the Red Sea coast that was built specifically as an alternative to Hormuz, the western terminus of the east-west pipeline that carries Saudi crude from the Gulf to the Red Sea without passing through the strait. And simultaneously, Iran struck the port of Fujairah on the UAE's Indian Ocean coast, the eastern terminus of the Abu Dhabi crude oil pipeline. The other Hormuz bypass route that Gulf states have spent decades and tens of billions of dollars building precisely for this scenario. Both bypass routes struck in a single operation, in the same 12-hour window that the Strait of Hormuz remains contested. Let me show you exactly what that means for the global energy architecture, because the headline version is giving you the names of two ports and moving on. I am not moving on. Before we go deeper, hit the subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. What Iran did this morning is not a military operation in the conventional sense of the word. It is an energy warfare operation targeting the entire alternative infrastructure that the world built to survive an Iranian closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Subscribe now. I will wait. The East-West pipeline in Saudi Arabia runs 1,200 kilometers from Abqaiq on the Gulf Coast to the Yanbu export terminal on the Red Sea. Its capacity is approximately 5 million barrels per day. Its entire strategic rationale since it was built in the 1980s has been to allow Saudi Arabia to export oil to European and American markets, even if the Strait of Hormuz is completely blocked by Iran. Yanbu is where those 5 million barrels per day would load onto tankers headed for the Suez Canal. Iran struck Yanbu this morning. The Abu Dhabi crude oil pipeline runs 400 kilometers from Habshan to Fujairah port on the Gulf of Oman coast. Its capacity is approximately 1.5 million barrels per day. Its strategic rationale is identical. Fujairah exists to bypass Hormuz. Iran struck Fujairah this morning. Together, the East-West pipeline and the ADCO pipeline represent approximately 6.5 million barrels per day of Hormuz bypass capacity. That bypass capacity is now disrupted. Hormuz is contested. The bypasses are struck. There is no third route. Read that again. There is no third route. Now let me walk you through what the Red Sea dimension specifically means, because Iran striking Yanbu is not just a Saudi Arabia story. Yanbu loads tankers that transit the Suez Canal. The Suez Canal is the maritime artery connecting the Gulf oil fields to European markets. If tankers cannot load at Yanbu, European countries that rely on Middle Eastern crude cannot receive it through the Suez route. Their alternative is the Cape of Good Hope route, adding approximately 15 to 20 days of additional transit time to every cargo, which absorbs additional tanker capacity from the global fleet and further tightens an already severely constrained supply picture. European energy markets have been operating on the assumption that even if Hormuz was blocked, Yanbu provided a viable Red Sea pathway. That assumption is now operationally invalid. Iran hit both the front door and the side door in the same operation. Now, what nobody is covering with sufficient strategic depth. Iran's targeting of Yanbu and Fujairah simultaneously is not improvised. It is the execution of a documented strategic concept that Iranian military planners have been developing for years. In 2019, when Iranian-linked forces struck Saudi oil infrastructure at Abqaiq, the operation targeted the processing nodes. The 2019 playbook was attrition of production. What we are seeing today is a different playbook entirely. Today's operation targets the export nodes. You can produce oil, you cannot export. Iran's current targeting architecture is not trying to prevent Saudi Arabia and the UAE from extracting oil from the ground. It is trying to prevent them from loading it onto ships. The distinction between disrupting production and disrupting export is the distinction between inconveniencing an oil exporter and economically strangling one. Export disruption is strategically more severe and operationally more durable because export infrastructure takes longer to repair than production infrastructure. Okay, I have to be fair. The other side has a point. First, the extent of damage at Yanbu and Fujairah is not yet independently verified. Iran has consistently overstated the severity of its strike effects throughout this conflict. The ports may have sustained limited damage that disrupts operations for days rather than weeks. Saudi Aramco and ADNOC, the respective national oil companies, both have extensive damage mitigation protocols and repair infrastructure. A limited strike on a port does not necessarily translate into a sustained export disruption. Second, the global oil market has additional supply flexibility that has not yet been fully activated. The United States Strategic Petroleum Reserve, the International Energy Agency's coordinated member releases, and the unused production capacity of several non-Gulf producers can partially compensate for Gulf export disruptions in the short term. Third, Iran's missile inventory, while it has demonstrated sustained capacity, is not unlimited. Every ballistic missile fired at Yanbu and Fujairah is a missile not available for other targeting purposes. Iran is making choices about how to allocate a finite resource, and those choices have opportunity costs. But here's where I have to be direct about what Brent Crude's behavior this morning is telling you. Oil opened at $186 per barrel today. 3 hours after the Yanbu and Fujairah strikes were confirmed, it reached $194. Before this war began, it was $64. That is a 200 to 3% increase in 26 days. At $200 per barrel, which Goldman Sachs now projects could be reached within 72 hours if the export disruption at both ports is confirmed as sustained, every serious economic model produces the same output. The United States enters recession within 90 days with approximately 90% probability. Germany, France, and Italy, which have already been paying elevated energy bills for 26 days, face energy rationing scenarios within 30 days if alternative supplies cannot be secured. Japan and South Korea, which import virtually all of their energy, face economic disruption at a scale that their governments have emergency protocols for but have never actually executed. This is not a regional conflict anymore. In any meaningful sense of the phrase, this is a global economic crisis. Here is what you need to watch. The Yanbu terminal's operational status update is the most important single data point in the world right now. Saudi Aramco's public communications over the next 6 hours will either confirm a manageable localized damage scenario or confirm a sustained export disruption that locks in the economic trajectory I just described. Watch the Suez Canal Authority's traffic data. If tanker bookings through the Suez Canal drop sharply in the next 24 to 48 hours, the market has determined that the Red Sea route is now as compromised as the Hormuz route, meaning the world has no functioning major export corridor for Gulf crude. Watch the Cape of Good Hope tanker routing data. If vessels are being rerouted from the Suez lane to the Cape route in large numbers, the additional 15 to 20 days of transit time per cargo is already being priced into supply chain calculations that will affect European energy markets within 2 to 3 weeks. And watch the emergency meetings being called right now. The IEA Emergency Board, the G7 energy ministers, and the Federal Reserve's emergency monitoring all activated within 2 hours of the Yanbu and Fujairah strike confirmations. When those institutions activate simultaneously, the crisis has crossed the threshold from geopolitical to systemic. Subscribe now, turn on notifications. When Aramco's Yanbu status update is released, I will break down every word. When the IEA emergency release decision is announced, I will cover the numbers immediately. When oil crosses $200, I will analyze what every economic model says happens next. And the models are in agreement on that outcome in a way that should concern every government still treating this as a regional conflict. Hormuz is closed. Yanbu is struck. Fujairah is struck. There is no third route. Evidence first, analysis second. You decide what it means. This is today.